Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of SBJ Live. I am Loren Williams with Sports Business Journal. Thank you so much for being here today. As you're arriving into our webinar room here, I just want to give a few instructions before I get to introduce our speakers for today. First and foremost, we want to make sure that you are interacting with us throughout this conversation. So please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat tab here that you see on your screen below. Tell us who you are and where you're coming from. And if you see people you know, feel free to message them as well here. Secondly, we want to note that there is a questions tab as well right next to that chat tab. So make sure you submit your questions throughout the webinar. Our moderator, Ben, here will be incorporating those questions throughout the conversation. So please do not wait until the end to submit them. Feel free to even upvote the questions that you like, and Ben will try to weave through those most popular questions that we see there. And that's it that I have for my housekeeping notes. So it is my pleasure to now introduce today's SBJ Live conversation titled NIL Collectives, Where They Stand and Where They Fall, with Russell White, President of the Collective Association, and Ben Portnoy, college sports reporter at Sports Business Journal. Over to you, Ben.
Loren, thank you so much for the introduction. You're far too kind. Russell White from the Collective Association. Russell, appreciate you hopping on with us and taking a few minutes to do this. Should be a really fun conversation here. But I think probably the best place to start, and again, like Loren said, if you guys have questions or any thoughts, comments, concerns, please put those in the chat as we go. We'll weave those in. But Russell, let's start here. Walk us through a little bit of kind of what the Collective Association is, kind of some of the missions and goals, and, maybe give folks who are, obviously a lot of folks in the college sports space here, but kind of the role of collectives right now in the college sports space as well.
Sure. Yeah, Ben, thank you for this opportunity. I'm really excited to join you today. Collective Association is a trade association we formed a little over a year ago. I guess officially we launched in January of this year, but we started doing work last summer. And it's a group of NIL collectives, like-minded collectives from across the country. And our main goals are we advocate on behalf of the athletes and their right to earn money without undue restriction on those opportunities, while also working to protect and grow and I guess increase the role of collectives in the overall college sports ecosystem. So everything's changing, as everyone knows, constantly. All these different shifts and things happening in the landscape. We work with thousands of athletes. We've done deals with thousands of athletes. We provide resources throughout our 45 member collectives. And so our group, the association, really just advocates on behalf of the role of collectives and athletes and is very involved in DC and on the state level. So it's kind of a broad overview.
No, it's a good place to start. I think, generally speaking, I think there's certainly a lot of changes in what is happening in college sports right now as it relates to collectives, the payment of athletes, kind of everything in that bucket. Let's start there with when you look at some of the changing landscape and the role of collectives moving forward. Obviously, we're in a new space. This is only about, 3 years, give or take, that this has been allowable under some variation. Yeah. As you look at sort of this next chapter of college sports, whether it relates to the House settlement or otherwise, and we can get to that in a few, what do you see as kind of the role of collectives and where they fit into this ecosystem that's obviously evolving by the day, if not the hour?
Sure. Yeah. The hour is probably more accurate there. Well, I think it's important to remember where we started with collectives. At the beginning of NIL, it may have been kind of that chaotic atmosphere or environment that a lot of people talk about. The NCAA, our friends over there, didn't do the athletes a lot of favors by flipping a switch on July 1 with not a lot of resources to help them. And a little bit of chaos there ensued for a while. And I think that at the beginning, collectives started, groups of donors would start to get together with a coaching staff or somebody at a university and talk about how can we retain our talent? How can we get more talent? What's the right way to do this? And I think that's where collectives started to pop up and working together. One thing we've done a lot of is advising and helping launch collectives. And really the purpose of that was, let's take the interim policy that the NCAA had in place at that point. Let's make sure we're in line with that, but let's build a business. Let's build an opportunity, a vehicle by which we could help athletes earn money. We can get them involved in their communities. We can get them working with brands. And I think that's where collectives started. And now we've built into these big companies. I mean, we're running small businesses in all these different communities. We have athletes involved in everything from charitable activities to brand deals to appearances to youth camps. I mean, everything you can think of. All ways for athletes to earn some money based off, obviously, the value they have in their name, image, and likeness. So that's kind of been the role of collectives. Along the way, we've picked up some other responsibilities, right? Providing resources that they need, whether it's legal advice, tax advice, financial literacy programs. I mean, each collective across the country has a little bit different program and the resources they provide, but I think overall, collectives have really been a stabilizing force in the market, where a lot of people refer to the Wild West and some of these other things. The constant has been collectives providing kind of a balance in what's happening. So going forward, it's an interesting thing. If and when the House settlement is approved, I think the role of collectives continues to change. It already has. We've already started to change a lot of collectives to more of an agency model, a little bit more focused on brand deals, focused on outreach in that area of NIL, while still maintaining membership programs and relationships with donors, because that's very important. But I think that, as we go down this road, they'll be able to align a lot more closely with universities, athletic departments. And I think each university is going to handle it a little bit differently, but the role of collectives, I think, collectives aren't going anywhere. We're going to be here. What that role looks like, I think, will be different at each school, maybe each conference. But, we're excited about the future and committed to working with every stakeholder in the space to kind of make it, a workable solution for everybody, especially the athletes.
I think you touched on it a little bit, and frankly, you took the words out of my mouth. I know colloquially we hear a lot, this is the Wild West. There's no rules, there's no regulations, not to put you on the spot, but a little bit of with that and that sort of characterization of what collectives are doing. I guess, how would you kind of describe it? And to your point, a little bit of what you touched on a minute ago, like, what is the actual function here? Like, what is it, maybe the misconception that people have, or what are maybe some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about what collectives are actually doing?
Yeah, collectives aren't out throwing bags of money at kids, pushing them into the transfer portal. It's just not happening, right? Like, it may happen here and there for a rogue group, but for the most part, collectives are here to help these athletes develop, help them realize their worth, their value, help them get that, whether it's from the collective group or from a brand or for somebody else. You got to think about it. The money in college sports is massive right now. It's big. And these 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old athletes, it's life-changing, and they've never had this experience, most of them. And so to be able to provide some resources to help support them as they adjust to what that life is like, I think that's a huge value that collectives bring to the space. We do more than just write checks to athletes. I think it's also important to realize, collectives have athletes do things for that money. It's not like we're just writing a check for one autograph. We have them out making appearances in the community, visiting schools, doing youth camps, speaking to groups. There's a lot of things that happen, sometimes behind the scenes, sometimes publicly, for these athletes to qualify for that money. And I think that we are the group that kind of stepped in to fill that void that was created. And I think that collectives, going forward, we hope to just continue to build on that. Let's bring more brands in. Let's get more people involved and see how we can make this work well.
We've got a couple of questions in the queue, so I'm going to jump over there. There's two that I think are sort of similar. First, from Steve Ross. Russell, as you may know, FIFA banned third-party payments to athletes out of concern about undue influence. What do you see as the role of collectives going forward? And do you believe that as universities compete for players, the school with the most donors ought to prevail? And then sort of a similar question, from John Driscoll, won't collectives disappear when schools can pay athletes directly? So I'll leave those sort of two similar questions to you.
Yeah. I'll say, won't collectives disappear when schools can pay athletes directly? No. Because that money, that revenue share number, whatever that is, I think it's estimated to be around 20.5 in year one. That now becomes the floor for what athletes are able to earn. And so, as we've seen, donor groups and schools are extremely competitive. They like to win. And what's going to be the differentiating factor? It's not going to be facilities. It hasn't been facilities for a while. It's nice to have those. But if I'm a top performing athlete, You can give me some of the revenue that I'm helping generate. That's great. We're excited about revenue sharing. But what else, right? What else? Because you can all probably offer me a similar amount of the revenue that's being shared. There's a cap on that, which is a whole nother discussion about how this is just a cap being implemented without any type of bargaining or discussion with the athletes. But I think that collective's role changes. I think that any school that fully understands the landscape is going to align extremely closely with their collective to say, hey, how can you now become our above and beyond, our next level, above and beyond the revenue share piece. We also have to take a good hard look at revenue sharing, with that cap that's being put in place. How's that going to be spread across different sports? How many athletes are going to be paid? How many female athletes are going to get some of that money? Are schools going to, fall in line with Title IX or no? Does it apply? Does it not apply? I think there's so many questions around revenue sharing. It really just solidifies the need for a competitive, successful collective to kind of provide additional funds to help retain and attract the top talent.
I think we've kind of alluded to it and talked around the House settlement. I think, most people in this chat and listening are probably pretty tuned in on this as well. But for those who are maybe less aware, I think it's probably good to give a little bit of an overview. For those who don't know, the House settlement is a handful of antitrust that have kind of been rolled up into one pending settlement. Hearing in April is set to kind of determine the future of that. Obviously, there's a few rungs to it, one of them being some oversight over collectives and maybe a little bit more oversight over NIL deals. Russell, I guess I'd ask this piece of it. When it comes to the House settlement, where does the collective association kind of stand on it? What do you guys see that it accomplishes? And what are maybe, if you have any concerns that you might have around the structure that it does lay out?
Yeah, there's definitely some concerns, but I think that there's a lot of good things included in the House settlement. What does it establish, right? Like revenue sharing is something that from day one, collective association has publicly been saying, we want revenue sharing. We're in support of revenue sharing. We think that should be a thing. So that's great. It also gets some money, some back pay to former athletes. Awesome. It went on far too long for athletes not able to earn any money. And I think that it's a great thing that we can get some money back to some of those former athletes. I think that's huge. But the reality of the House settlement is, how is this clearinghouse going to work? Why are they targeting only collective or third-party deals to look at, to potentially, impact eligibility for athletes? How do they expect to establish a fair market value when, we've already seen what does that mean? How do you even calculate that for each athlete, for each activity? It's going to be different. Fair market value really comes down to what someone's willing to pay someone to do something, right? So to have a third party that's going to look these things over and arbitrarily decide if it's good or not is a little bit wild. So we'll see how that works out. But in reality, the House settlement really only accomplishes back pay and revenue sharing, which is great, but it does limit future NIL opportunities for athletes, and it is going to eliminate roster spots for Olympic sports. And so we're already starting to see some of those numbers come out. We're already starting to see coaches who are upset about it, parents and athletes who are upset about it. I'm sure we'll have some administrators that don't love the idea of having to cut, Olympic sport rosters. And so I think that the most important thing here is the athletes need to know what this actually means. There's ways to do that. I'm sure everyone in the chat is throwing in their link to their educational sites, and that's great. There needs to be resources. The universities need to work with their athletes and educate them on what this actually means, because it's a massive thing. There's impact to every single athlete at the university in every sport. And what we don't want to see is a bunch of roster spots eliminated so that there can be more money going to, certain athletes. I think that, again, points to the importance of collectives. Let's look at, if a university decides they're going to share most of their revenue with football, basketball, women's basketball, soccer, women's soccer, whoever else, what sports they do, will they utilize their collective to bring revenue in for their other athletes? Or will they split that revenue on the revenue share side a little bit more equally, disperse it amongst more athletes, and utilize the collective to help boost up their football, basketball, soccer, whatever payments to athletes? So I think each university needs to be looking at this as they strategize, and I think that there's a lot out there. But athletes need to know what's in this settlement because they do have an option, right? And as an association, we're not taking a position today of, opt out, don't opt out, whatever. Our position is athletes need to know what's in this. I think it's up to the universities to educate them. We will educate them as well. But I think that they need to know that they have options. They need to know the reality of what's included in this settlement. And I think, don't just rely on the headlines. Let's do a little research and figure out, because there's a big impact from this.
Like anything with the House settlement, I think it's, we pull on one string, we get like 7 or 8 more and a few other issues that pop up and certainly a couple of questions in the chat about this. And I think we'll touch on a couple. One from Jasmine Crenshaw, with collectives increasingly involved with universities, how then are collectives and universities managing and ensuring Title IX compliance? And then I think sort of another piece to that ties in, a couple folks asked about non-revenue sports or Olympic sports. I'll go to Jeff Garrett's question about how committed to and how are collectives aiding in finding opportunities for athletes in the non-revenue or Olympic sports.
Yeah, and I'll start with that one. I think that if you look, each collective is a little bit different, but you could point to some great examples. I'll point to one, the Grove Collective at Ole Miss. They spend a lot on football and basketball for sure, but they also work with volleyball and softball and a bunch of other sports too. I think that collectives have done a great job as the space has matured to spread that money out. As we look for opportunities, if there's a donor who specifically wants to give to a sport, say there's a donor who wants to specifically give to volleyball, the collectives will facilitate that and spend that money with the volleyball team. BYU, the Royal Blue Collective, is a great example of that. They have a donor who helps, or a couple donors who donate to volleyball and help those athletes, women's basketball, men's basketball. So I think as far as that goes, collectives have come a long way, and I think are doing a very good job of making sure that others make money besides just football and basketball. To the first part of the question about repeat that for me real quick.
Yeah, about Title IX.
Title IX.
Title
Yes,
IX.
no, that's great.
With collectives increasingly involved with universities, how then are collectives and universities managing and ensuring Title IX compliance?
It's a great question. So at this point, it's been left up to each university to decide how they do that. Representative Lori Trahan, who we work with in Congress a bit, recently wrote a letter and sent it to the Department of Education asking for some clarity around this. It's a question that's been asked a lot. Does it apply? Does it not apply? How does it apply if it does apply? And I think that, my hope is that we get some clarification or some guidance there. She has been awesome in standing up for and advocating for the rights of all athletes. I think she's a great person that we work with in Congress that has the right vision for, what this whole, how this whole thing should shake out and look. But I would encourage everyone, if I had the link, I'd send in the chat to read that letter and get involved. Because again, that's a big question from day one. And I think it's a big question going forward is around Title IX. And it's an important thing. There's the argument of who generates the revenue. Should they get the bigger piece, or, the overall athletic department and the goals of every athlete? And I think that there's valid arguments on each side. So hopefully we get some guidance on that. If not, hopefully the conferences or somebody steps up and puts some things in place so there's a little bit of uniformity. But my hope again is, and I think a byproduct of this settlement that's not being talked about enough, is there will be elimination of roster spots in Olympic sports from this. And this is, another example of if they're not getting any of the revenue share and they're going to eliminate your team, that's a tough spot for thousands of athletes to be in. So
you mentioned the roster piece of this, and I think that's probably a piece that's maybe not quite as straightforward or maybe a little harder for people to get their minds around. Can you walk us through kind of a little bit of the roster limits and kind of what that might look like and maybe why there is concern around that on the Olympic sports side?
Yeah. Max Wolpoff, thank you for linking to that letter on the chat. I see that. So the roster spots, it's interesting. So there's just like a lot of things, there's some good and some bad, right? So that roster limit, let's say football, for example, if it now goes up to 105, I believe. So now the roster's capped at 105. Well, most football teams are operating in the 120, 125 number of athletes right now. So that's 20 athletes that you have to cut. Which is interesting. That's an interesting space to live in. But being able to offer 105 scholarships instead of 83 or 85 scholarships, you now can provide scholarships to the other 15, 20 new athletes. Those have to be funded, and there's some money. Some of that counts. I don't know if that counts towards a cap or not. I'd have to look. But the fact that there is a cap, it still makes me upset. But the the idea that the athletes it's going to kill the idea of the walk-on, right? The traditional walk-on who gets in there and busts their butt, earns some time. That's going to be essentially removed or at least decreased. With those roster increases in certain decreases in certain sports, to fund those scholarships, that's going to take money. They're already having the universities to share a fifth of their revenue with the athletes now. Then they have these new additional costs. Obviously, something has to go. Something has to be cut. And each department or each school, I guess, will handle this, in a different way. They all have the ability to do that. But the reality of it is, if you look at these sports that don't generate a lot of revenue, maybe operate at a loss, that are a little bit subsidized by the larger sports, there is going to be some cuts there where, a field hockey team may no longer be, or a swimming team may be gone. And thinking about that as far as Olympic development goes, you have to take into account that the United States is, I believe, the only country still that doesn't really subsidize Olympic development from the government side. College sports has been a place where Olympic development happens. And if some of these Olympic sports rosters are eliminated, what does that do to the Olympic development program? Is it their responsibility to keep it? That's another debate. There's a lot to talk about here, but there's a lot of impacts beyond just we're getting some money to former athletes and we're sharing revenue with current and future athletes. I think that's my overall view of this. Is there's a lot more that's impacted by this settlement than just those two things.
Beyond the settlement, obviously, there's a lot of conversation on Capitol Hill around NIL and college sports in general. A couple of questions in the chat. I'll start with kind of the first one from Max Walpov. What do you want to see from federal legislation regulating college sports? I guess I'll leave that open-ended, but around that conversation, what are some of the things that the collective association or you guys would want to see in this sort of hypothetical college sports bill?
Yeah. I think that we need to let things play out a little bit in the space. We've seen the professionalization of the space over time, just in the 3 years, even in the last year. If you look at where we were last November 20th to today, it's a much different landscape. If the federal government gets involved, our hope and what we speak to members of Congress and their staff when we visit DC, and we have a great lobbying team there with Jesse and Tidal Basin, and they do a lot of great work on our behalf kind of every day. But our hope is that it won't be a heavy-handed approach. It'll be a limited impact. If the NCAA is unable to manage this and be the group, I don't know that they have the trust of the stakeholders. I don't know they've proven they deserve that shot. Then we will need some standard guidelines, and where those come from, whether they're the conferences or government, who knows. Our hope would be it would be a light-handed approach. We don't want overbearing government intrusion. Let's let the market work a little. I think that it's proven that it can do some good things. But also, the conferences, I think, play an important role. Each institution plays an important role. So as far as legislation goes, as long as it doesn't restrict the athlete's ability to earn money in an unfair way, which we've seen for years, and in my opinion, what the House settlement brings is an unfair or undue restriction. As long as that's not part of it, and there's some protections for athletes and some opportunities for athletes to grow, I think that the government could come up with something that works. But that's why, and I'll share this with you. I've shared this with you, Ben. We work with every stakeholder in the space. We're open to it. We reach out to every conference. We reach out to the NCAA. We try to work with these groups to say, hey, how do we figure all this out together? We've worked with other advocacy groups, College Football Players Association, athletes.org. These are great groups that provide great resources for athletes already. And we have conversations with them. We work with them saying, how do we do this together? And we share that message on Capitol Hill. They know when we reach out to these groups and they don't get back to us, or they do get back to us. And I think that it's important to realize that the government, at least the people we work with on Capitol Hill, aren't jumping at the chance to get in and over-regulate this space. They want to see if we can figure it out, the stakeholders can figure it out, and then provide some guidelines where needed.
Good question from Luke Bogus in this chat, and I think this ties into a little bit of what you were saying as well. How will collectives collaborate with in-house revenue sharing departments starting July 1, or should they? And then I think there was another question, if I can scroll through here and find it, around third-party NIL versus in-house and schools bringing that process of revenue sharing in-house. How do you kind of view that piece of this conversation and sort of this evolution over probably, more than likely the next 6-8 months?
Yeah, I think that obviously as universities and collectives work more closely together, there's an opportunity to help, work together on that rev share piece. I think collaboration is great. I think alignment's good. I think that university athletic departments need to modernize and realize that collaboration with other parties is a good thing. And if we work together, you can come up with better solutions. Revenue sharing is important. It's exciting. We're excited for it. I think that'll vary school by school. We already have examples within our association of collectives that are working very closely with the planning. We'll be beginning to implement some of these things soon. And I think that those universities are the ones who are going to be miles ahead, if and when this goes into effect in July.
This is a good question from Chris White. Considering the new floor potentially set by the House case and the continuing existence of collectives, how much will collectives need to generate to remain competitive? And what are some of the innovative strategies you suggest collectives implement to be successful post-House?
Yeah, that's a great question. How much will they need to generate? That's a moving target. So I will tell you this right now. The top Power 4 collectives right now are operating on budgets of 15, 17, 20, 24 million a year. And that's football, basketball, that's all sports. There's not a lot, if any, collectives that really are spending 20 million on one team. The headlines, always take the headlines with a grain of salt, but there is real money being added to these programs. Most Power 4 collectives are operating at that 10 million or so, give or take below that. So a good amount of money is still going to need to be generated. Really, what's it going to take for you to be competitive in the areas you want to be competitive? So if I'm a 5-star quarterback, a top, female basketball player that's a point guard that's in demand, and I go to the school and they tell me they can offer me X in rev share and it's really about the same as the other 10 schools that I'm looking at, okay, what else can you provide? And that's where your collective is going to need to be competitive. If you can match what they're getting in revenue share and collective deals, whether they're brand-based or donor-based, I think that's what's going to be the most enticing type of a package for an athlete. And the whole idea that we shouldn't be able to discuss these things before an athlete decides on their school and enrolls is crazy to me. Like who in their right mind would do something like this, commit to something, go into something, with all their effort, not knowing what that piece looks like. I mean, it's important for the athletes and their families to understand that. So how much is going to be required? I don't think the numbers change too much, but it's going to be a lot if they want to be competitive. And really, I think that number will just go up and up and up every year as we've seen it do the first 3 years of NIL.
I think you mentioned something there that was, I think, something we haven't necessarily touched on, but I think is an interesting concept of obviously collectives have been fairly donor driven. And I know we talk a lot about donor fatigue, and that's a common thread that's thrown around a lot in this space. What do you feel like is kind of the balance, and what kind of balance needs to be struck between donors, brands? How do you feel like maybe in this new era of, quote unquote, fair market value and things along those lines, do you feel that there needs to be a shift? Do you feel like there may be a shift toward more sort of brand centric deals versus donor centric deals? How do you see that sort of playing out?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that shift's already underway. And I agree wholeheartedly. We talked a little bit earlier about how collectives are going to change their model a little bit, become more like an agency, versus just a fundraising group. And I think that brand deals are going to be very important. Along with pretty much every collective operator we work with, would love to see more brand deals in the space. Let's get more brands involved with these athletes. There's a ton of great stories that can be shared around. Each athlete has a crazy story, has overcome something, has something unique about themselves or their situation. If brands can put forth the effort to tap into those stories, get to know these athletes, pay attention to the landscape, I think there's a great play for brands to spend more money in the space. Let's shine a light on these athletes and their stories. And doing that through the collective, get in touch with your collectives and ask them, what athlete, tell me a unique story. Tell me, this is my brand, what athletes would fit it. And collectives, we know the athletes, the operators of these collectives, the people who work in them, work very closely with these athletes. And so, yes, I think there's going to be a big shift towards more brand money. Donor money will still be there. I think that's important to remember. People are starting to see that, maybe I want to give my money to the collective where I get a really cool experience or some access that, outside of giving it to my school's booster club where I get a nice card and the opportunity to buy tickets earlier than everybody else. There's more return. Collectives have done a great job of creating a great experience for the people who donate and are a part of that. So I don't think that all the donor money automatically goes back to the universities. I think the universities need to start working on improving their customer experience for the people who donate. But I would encourage, donors and people who want to get involved, look at the collective along with the university, work together. Again, my goal, my ideal situation is when someone comes to the table with some money, they can go to that school that they love, and the athletic department will say, look, we have an NIL collective. If you want to give money here, we've got a booster club here. We're raising for facilities here. Just make it an option, and let's make it clear and easy to understand. And I think donor fatigue will decrease and not be as big of a talking point that people use across the space.
I think this is a fun sort of hypothetical from Steve Ross here in the chat. Would this model work in pro sports where avid fans join a collective to help bring an athlete to a team? Would this be cap evasion in capped leagues? Why wouldn't this work in baseball? Wealthy Pittsburgh leaders give to a collective to get the Pirates to spend more. As a New York Giants fan, I would love to see a new quarterback come in, so maybe they can take my $10 and help out or whatever. But Russell, how do you kind of see what's your thought on that?
Yeah.
A good hypothetical.
Would definitely be cap evasion, but it doesn't keep wealthy Pittsburgh leaders, brands from working with these athletes and just adding to the money that they make. That's the beauty of professional sports too, and athletes in general. You can use them to promote your brand and do anything you want outside of that, and it's not cap evasion, right? The cap is in place. It's been negotiated, collectively bargained by the Players Association and the employers, and that's a great thing. It wouldn't be, and Steve, I don't know, I'm assuming you live in Pittsburgh, so you might want to figure this out quick. You only got a few more years of Paul Skeens before that's going to become a real issue. So make sure that he sticks around there. But I think that, it wouldn't really work in pro sports as a collective, but for brands getting involved to work with athletes, that's always out there as a way to keep them around.
There's been a couple of questions kind of about this, about what should schools be doing now to kind of prepare for revenue sharing. I guess I'd turn that to what are collectives doing now to prepare for revenue sharing, but also I think the other layer to this is how are schools sort of balancing these, their different responsibilities, right? Every school is different. Say, University of South Carolina is obviously going to invest in its women's basketball team. LSU is going to invest in its baseball team. How do you see collectives and schools sort of managing that balance? And what are schools maybe doing now to prepare for this world that, in theory is probably coming here in the next, or potentially coming here in the next 6-7 months?
Yeah, and I think most schools are heavily involved in planning and coming up with contingency plans, right? Kind of A, B, and C, depending on how this all shakes out. And I think that's smart. I think working, again, I go back to, you have to collaborate with your partners. So collectives should be in that room with the athletic department, helping put these plans together, because nobody has been more involved on the ground floor of what's happening in NIL than collectives. We're really the only group that works with every stakeholder in the space. We work with the parents, we work with the athletes, we work with the agents, the agencies, the brands, the donors, the athletic department, the coaching staffs. I mean, we work with everybody. So we can really give a different perspective on what's happening and what the realities are versus what you hear. And so I think that as far as planning goes, collectives are ready to be active partners. They should be engaged partners with the university and helping put these plans in place and find out, like you said, each university is going to do a little bit different. Each university has different sports they want to support. They probably have different donors with different interests. So let's find a way to just get in a room and build a system that meets all of the needs that we have, specific to our school. I think collectives are ready and willing to be a part of that, and they are heavily involved in a lot of universities. But I would encourage every university to tap into the knowledge and the experience there in your collective.
Daryl Duvall in the chat asked, are there any good HBCU collectives? And I guess I'll extrapolate that out. What are maybe some of the schools, whether it's HBCUs or FCS schools or maybe lower level, D1 or Group of 5 schools? What are some of the things that you're seeing in that space around what they can do, whether it's rev share, collectives, NIL, that can be, applied at scale maybe?
Yeah, no, I wish there were more good, solid HBCU collectives. I think there are some doing some good things. And I've personally met with a couple of groups looking to put together kind of HBCU focused collectives. And I think that the direction that they're going is great. So I think that there's some change and some opportunity coming there. And I love that. As far as Group of 5 goes, there's a lot of collectives there that have really professionalized and are stepping up their game. We recently with TCA expanded our offering and started bringing Group of 5 schools in. So prior to, originally everything we were doing was focused around Power 4 and legislation and But we decided, we need to tap into these group of 5 schools and offer the same sharing of best practices and everything that we're doing for Power 4 schools to that level. And so, Memphis, the 901 Fund, and Mesa, the San Diego State Basketball Fund, and University of South Florida, Fowler Ave, they're all part of TCA now, and they're a part of these discussions. They're learning from the Power 4 collectives and sharing information with Power 4 collectives that they frankly weren't aware of. So I think that, again, collaboration in the space is good. I think as far as revenue programs, I think that you got to tap into every single option you have, and that's the beauty of a collective, and I think the flexibility there. Brand dollars, donor dollars, membership-driven dollars, event dollars, memorabilia dollars, merchandise dollars, everything you can do. It's basically you're creating a business to help, provide opportunity for athletes.
We've got a few more minutes here, so if you have any other last-minute questions, definitely get those in the chat. We'll get to those as quickly as we can. I'll go to Jake Toplitsky, who's asked a couple, and this is another good one. If revenue sharing does come to fruition, wouldn't it make sense for institutions to absorb collectives as an institutional extension of the development office for student-athletes, specific donations versus being a separate entity? I think that ties into a little bit of what we were talking about with the third party, but Russell, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, in theory, yes. But I would counter back with, show me an athletic department that does these things efficiently already, and then let's add this to it. I don't think it's any secret that athletic departments have a lot of work to do in how they service these groups, but also how they function, kind of top to bottom, the setup, the processes, the individuals in a lot of those departments. I think that, the contract negotiation piece of what collectives do is something that I don't know you want university employees being a part of. At least not now. And so I think that there's a lot of value in keeping it as a separate entity. Now, to your point, though, development, they're talking to donors, they're talking to groups, they're talking to people with money. Back to my point earlier about everyone at the same table, they should be offering that opportunity already. Hey, we are raising money for a new stadium or practice facility. We are, our booster club has this offering, or our collective has this offering. You want to put your money there, and the university should pay that employee for the money they bring into the collective the same way they do for the money they bring into the booster club and anything else. Because if you can figure out that alignment and put it, or why people aren't doing that already, you found the magic pill there. I think that that's a natural progression. I think we should already be there where development offices are raising money for the collective and pushing it that way. I do think there is some value in the negotiation of contracts and dealing with agents and other things that maybe it's better to keep at a third-party level.
Russell, I'll go to the kind of last thing before we close out here. What do you feel like is something that people should take away about collectives from this conversation, or maybe should know about collectives and kind of the work that you guys are doing in this space as this continues to evolve? Yeah, no, thanks for that.
It's collectives are again, we see ourselves as very much a stabilizing force in the space. And I think that the opportunity to work with these athletes has really evolved. I think finding ways to support them has been an important piece of what we do. And I think it will continue to be going forward, right? Like collectives like to provide resources to athletes. They like to mentor athletes, provide opportunities to athletes. And I think they've done it at a level that, frankly, other parties have failed at to this point. And so, going forward, my assumption is most universities are going to continue their relationship and keep building that with the collectives. That's kind of where we're working towards. And that's a goal we've had from day one, is work with everybody, and let's figure out the best way to create a system that benefits everybody, but especially benefits the athletes, because they've kind of been the forgotten party for way too long, especially in an industry that generates billions of dollars. That's an unfortunate reality. So we need to find a way to create a system that they're central to, that serves them, and I think that collectives can play a big role in that. Russell, this was awesome. Thanks so much for doing this. Loren, I'll throw it back to you and let you close us out here.
Yeah, absolutely. Russell and Ben, thank you so much for taking the time today for this conversation. This has been absolutely fantastic. And to the audience, thank you so much for joining us today and sending in some really great questions. If you are interested in learning more about NIL and the ever-changing landscape of college sports, please feel free to check out our upcoming conference, IAF, which will be taking place December 10th through the 11th in Las Vegas. We've just dropped the link in the chat if you're interested about learning more about that event. But that's all we have today. Thank you guys so much, and we look forward to seeing you guys next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks
everyone.